heartbeat of Bahrain's revolution began on Valentine's 2011, where tens of thousands gathered at the Pearl Roundabout in Manama. The energy in their chants impalpable, men and women alike. Out of a populace of 600,000, an impressive 150,000 were on the streets within a week. Crackdown began very early into the movement, with the government sending in troops and tanks to thwart protesters. And by mid-March, emergency was declared and arrests and use of force began. But the protests never stopped. They continue on a daily basis. Yet the title of the Al Jazeera documentary rings true. It appears that Bahrainis have been shouting in the dark with little international attention or aid. Maryam Al Khawaja has been amongst those who have not stopped. Although away from home, an intentional decision, she continues to rally support abroad, relaying the message one diplomat and one city at a time of what is happening and what should happen in her home. Despite the continuing repression, she believes in mobilizing peaceably and resisting peacefully.
I definitely believe in civil disobedience. It actually takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to be able to practice civil disobedience. But also the reason why it's so powerful is because you never fight your enemies with the strongest weapon they have. You fight them with the strongest weapon you have.
Can you tell me the latest? The 3-year anniversary is coming up. Where does the situation stand? You said they're beefing up security. What can we expect on the day?
So just like every year when the anniversary comes around, there are more and more calls for protests. People who wouldn't normally maybe join the protests on a daily basis around the year usually will want to join the protest movement on the anniversary. And so we're expecting a lot of protests, but we're also expecting a very severe crackdown. So every year the government gets better at controlling the protest movement, and especially the areas where people can protest. We saw this on August 14th last year, where they literally put entire residential areas on lockdown by putting barbed wires around entire residential areas so people could not reach the main streets and that way not grow in numbers. So the Bahraini government, of course, has massive security cooperation with many countries. They buy a lot of their military weapons from the United States, from the United Kingdom. A lot of their crowd control gear is coming from companies like German, South African tear gas companies, from the birdshot pellet, which has been a huge issue in Bahrain because it's caused numerous deaths. It's coming from places like Cyprus. But they're also buying a lot of crowd control gear and weapons from places like France and the United Kingdom.
What is the biggest threat that you see coming out of this?
Increase in violence is the biggest threat, I would say, at this point. We're looking at a situation where for the past 3 years, human rights defenders like myself have been talking about how these governments in what we call the free world, who say that their foreign policy is based on human rights and democracy. They say that's the cornerstone of their foreign policy, but yet choose to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to the human rights situation in Bahrain, say that they're not getting involved to a certain extent because of the violence. But what we're telling them is that they're creating space for violence to happen, for violence to increase. People become more and more frustrated. But the most dangerous weapon that's being sent is in Libya, people carried arms and they got NATO. In Syria, people carried arms, at least internationally, the Syrian issue is being discussed. Bahrain is almost being completely ignored, and so people feel like, well, maybe we need to do what the Libyans or the Syrians did for us to be recognized internationally and for governments to care more about what's going on in Bahrain and this human rights situation.
So why is Bahrain not getting the attention from externally that we're seeing in the case of Syria or Libya or even Egypt in certain ways?
Well, Bahrain is what we like to call an inconvenient revolution. It's not convenient to the Arabs and it's not convenient to the West. And for many reasons. First of all, geopolitically, Bahrain is very important because of its relationship with the GCC countries, and namely Saudi Arabia. But then also because of the security and economic relationships that the GCC as a whole, but Bahrain specifically, has with Western countries. For example, you have the United States Fifth Fleet located in Bahrain. Prince Andrew of the United Kingdom was reportedly in Bahrain just a while ago trying to sell armored jets to the Bahraini king. So you're seeing this ongoing business as usual of selling arms, doing deals, security deals, economic deals with the Bahraini government at a time when it continues to crack down on the people demanding reforms and change and democracy.
Your sister and your father, could you update us on that? What is happening with Zainab? They seem to keep extending her sentence.
Sure. So my father is in the Bahrain 13 case, along with my uncle, his younger brother. And their situation hasn't really changed. My uncle was sentenced to 5 years, my father to life imprisonment. They're still being subjected to various forms of harassment. My sister Zainab, on the other hand, was supposed to be released in February this year, so around now. But as is the case usually with her situation, they decided last minute to bring forward a pending case that has been on the shelf since April 2012. They informed her that the hearing was happening about 30 minutes before it actually took place. Her lawyer was not informed. And they issued a verdict within that hearing, where she was sentenced on 2 counts of insulting the king because of ripping his picture, where she was sentenced to 2 months per charge. So she has an additional 4 months now added to her sentence. And our guess is that they're probably going to keep doing that every time her release date comes up.
What about the EU-GCC relationship of theirs? How's that impacting how they're reacting?
So there's a difference within the EU between the foreign ministries and the governments and between the EU Parliament. The EU Parliament has been doing a tremendous job in bringing Bahrain to the attention of the governments. I've met with several EU Parliament members who have been amazing, who have really put a lot of effort into bringing Bahrain up as an issue, and there's actually a resolution being discussed right now at the EU Parliament on Bahrain. But unfortunately, when it comes to EU reaction to Bahrain, what the EU Parliament says doesn't apply much pressure to the actual government's reactions and foreign policies. And so at a time when the EU is discussing and negotiating a free trade agreement with the GCC countries, what should be on the table as a discussion is human rights. Unfortunately, that's not the case.